Hypertime, I should draw you a map on the back of a napkin because that's what Grant did, except Grant's the only guy who knows how to draw Hypertime on the back of a napkin. We were in a cab ride in New York going to a DC conference. It was him and me, Mark Miller was in the cab, and we were talking about how to do something special that made all continuity fluid and all stories were accurate, whether or not they fit in continuity at all. They still had meaning, they still had importance. And Grant started sketching, this big, giant thing on the, with railroad tracks and chasms and this and that. He was basically Grant was trying to draw a fourth dimensional object in 3 dimensions.
Moving on to the next level of reality beyond, okay, what if superheroes were real? What if it was Watchmen? What if it was the Ultimates? And thinking, but they're not real, no matter how hard you try and convince me that they could live in the real world, they can't. There are none. But the one place they are real is here, in this thing that you hold in your hand, this artifact. The superhero is real. That is a superhero. That's what it looks like in our world. It's the closest they can get to reality, unless they go on the screen. So I was kind of thinking about it as a real continuum. And DC obviously has the notion of the timeline. It's like there's this real important, it starts in the beginning and you can follow all the characters through, and there's caveman DC, and then there's Puritan DC, and then there's medieval, through to the present day, and on into the future with a legion of superheroes and DC 1 million, and then at the end of time they've got the linear men. So they have this notion that time is a line, so I thought, well, that's basic geometry. If time is a line, then wouldn't that mean that there could be lots of lines on a plane? And so I drew this thing up on the back of a napkin to show to Mark Waid, and it was like a kind of junction, a train junction, where these lines, each of which represented different universes, meaning different comic books that contradicted one another, they could all run parallel, and sometimes they crossed over. Sometimes that Batman who didn't agree with that Batman agreed with him here and fed in a little bit more. So although Frank Miller's Dark Knight didn't actually fit into canon with Batman, what it did was feed some of its energy into the main Batman line to reinvigorate it. So I'd created this big kind of diagram that was like a loom, and then I thought, okay, if that's all the comics, and in fact even on that line you can have the Marvel Comics line running along here, and sometimes even it crosses over when Marvel and DC are friends, you've got this beautiful model of comic books as a concept, as it's a 2-dimensional plane with all these timelines running, crossing over one another. And then I thought, and obviously above that, taking the metaphor of the geometry higher, you would have cube time. And in cube time are people like us who are able to look down on plane time, where all the comic book universes are, from a higher dimensional perspective, which then allowed me to imagine hypercube time, which would be the kind of entities I was talking to you about from the Kathmandu experience, looking down on our space-time as the same flat surface where they can see future, past, present, simultaneously. And so that's what Hypertime was. It was a kind of geometric vision that would incorporate the real world and the comic universe, and allow every story that was ever told to be real, because they are real. You can go and pick them up, and whether the continuity contradicts or not, the stories remain real, and it was all my thing was always about getting to the next level of what's real and what a comic is, rather than trying to pretend that I was telling stories about a world that you just couldn't get to, a special world where Superman lives. There is no world where Superman lives. That's it. It's on that page. And so that's what I was trying to get at with Hypertime. With all these concepts, they were about taking the physicality of it. Again, it's the transcendental materialism thing. It's like looking at a comic and not just taking it for face value. Oh, it's just a paper thing. I'm finished with it. No, you're not. It just did something to your head. Someone made that and it just communicated with you, and at the same time there's thousands of other people reading it today, tomorrow, in the future. You're all connected. Everyone who looks at that page is looking at the same page and experiencing something from that page, but everyone's connected through time by that. What's actually going on, as I say, is so magical, so bizarre, so weird. The interaction between the two consciousnesses of creative people and of readers that brings the comic to life, because a dog would look at that comic and there's nothing there, but a human looks at it and extracts emotion and extracts meaning from those pen scratches. That transaction is so wild to me, it's so exciting and so interesting. that I wanted to explore the reality of that, and maybe that's what's confused people who read my stuff, and they want to go to another world, a fantasy world that they can pretend is different, and I'm trying to force them to acknowledge what they're actually doing in their rooms with their comics.